Gray skies and drizzling rain, familiar to anyone who has spent a season in Olympic National Park. A spotlight was shining through the thick fog. Mike Crawford's breath turned to clouds of vapor as he moved slowly around the perimeter of the dilapidated cabin, gun at the ready. 20 years of hunting and 5 years as a ranger had taught him to recognize the tracks of every animal that inhabited these ancient forests. But what he'd found today was the work of man, and it was far more dangerous than encountering a hungry bear or an angry cougar. In the dim light, he noticed fresh drops on the mossy floor. Mike touched the dark liquid with his finger and held it up to his face. Blood, still warm. Communication in this part of the park has always been unreliable. The dense foliage and mountainous terrain created a natural obstacle. "Crawford, this is base. Over. We have an emergency." Mike didn't have time to respond. A distinctive metallic click behind him made him raise his hands slowly. When he turned around, he saw a familiar face he hadn't expected to find in this wilderness, the face of a man he hadn't seen in 5 years, a man he had once called a friend. "Long time no see, Pathfinder," the man said, holding the hunting shotgun pointed straight at Mike's chest. Mike Crawford inspected a fallen tree on the trail and noted its coordinates in his notebook. It was a typical ranger's morning in Olympic National Park, one of the rainiest places in the United States, where rainfall reached 14 feet a year. For most park visitors, patrolling in such conditions would be a challenge, but not for a former professional hunter-tracker with 15 years of experience. Not for nothing was he nicknamed Pathfinder. Mike read the woods like an open book, but 5 years ago, everything changed. Mike stopped, noticing a footprint on the damp ground. A cougar, an adult female, had passed through here no more than 3 hours ago. Strangely, the tracks ran along the trail. These predators usually avoided human routes. By midday, he had reached the lookout, and surveying the valley through binoculars, he noticed a thin trickle of smoke at the bend of the Hoh River. According to the permit log, no one was supposed to be in the area. Toward evening, Mike approached the spot where he had spotted the smoke. Through a veil of moss, he discerned a small cabin not on the official maps. Peering cautiously through the window, he saw hunting rifles on the counter and, most alarming of all, a freshly stripped puma skin on the table. Poachers. Backing away, Mike accidentally stepped on a branch. A sound gave away his presence. A voice came from the cabin. "Check the perimeter. Someone's been here." Mike slipped silently into the woods, but half a mile from the cabin, his eyes caught a familiar object. A hunting knife hammered into the wood with a distinctive antler handle. It was a knife he himself had given to his former partner, Dave Thompson. "Thompson, I've heard that last name somewhere before," station manager Robert Carson said as he studied the knife. "My former hunting partner," Mike replied. "We haven't seen each other in over 5 years." "Call your daughter," Carson said abruptly. "She's been trying to get in touch with you." With Emma, Mike had a complicated relationship. After the divorce, their contact had become infrequent and formal. Back at the cabin, he read a letter from his daughter. She'd be in Seattle for 3 months and might stop by the park. Mike sent a short reply saying he'd be glad to meet her. The next day, Mike and 2 colleagues returned to the site of the hut. But they found only an empty clearing. The poachers had gone down the river, having washed away all traces. Carefully surveying the area, Mike found a metal box with a photograph. It shows 3 men next to a dead grizzly bear. Dave Thompson is among them. On the back are coordinates and the date, October 11th, 2005. "Bailey Range," Carson pronounced, noting the coordinates on the map. "An inaccessible place, especially in autumn." "It's got the largest cougar population in the park," Mike added. "And the bears come down before hibernation. It's a perfect place for poachers." "Or a trap for you," Carson warned. Over the past year, the population of pumas in the park has dropped by 12%. There was no time for bureaucracy. "Reconnaissance. I'll head into the mountains alone," Mike suggested. After some hesitation, Carson agreed. 3-day reconnaissance, constant communication. And Crawford, remember, you're a ranger, not a hunter. 2 days later, fully equipped, Mike set off for the wildest part of Olympic Park. Somewhere out there, his former friend-turned-enemy was waiting for him. One thing he knew for sure, there would be bloodshed in the park this autumn. And not just animals. The helicopter hovered over the canyon, cutting the air with its blades. Below, the river raged, turning from a calm stream to a raging torrent of uprooted trees. Mike Crawford, strapped to the rescue winch, peered into the churning water, trying to make out the orange waistcoats of the missing hikers. 2 minutes, then we're out of here, shouted the pilot into the microphone. The storm is intensifying. The record rainfall of the last week turned October 2007 into a nightmare for Olympic Park rangers. 6 consecutive torrential days led to flooding, collapses, and evacuations of tourist areas. But 3 visitors, a father with 2 teenagers, refused to leave a remote campsite by the River Ho, confident they would make it out before the flood peaked. Their camp was now completely flooded, and the search and rescue coordinator received a faint distress signal from their GPS beacon. Mike finally spotted them, a bright spot on a small island in the middle of the rushing stream. The 3 men huddled against a lone tree that was leaning more and more every minute, swept by the current. "I see the target," he shouted into the radio. 10 meters down, south edge of the islet." The helicopter tilted, dropping lower. The wind tossed the machine like a toy. Mike prepared for descent by checking the safety harness carabiners. When he was about 15 meters from the ground, he noticed something else. On the opposite bank of the river, among the trees, the figure of a man with binoculars flashed. Even at this distance, Mike recognized the gate, Dave Thompson. 2 years ago, their paths had crossed in the Bailey Range. Thompson had slipped away, leaving behind only empty shell casings and another strange clue, an old map with a marked canyon. The same canyon where Mike was now conducting a rescue mission. But there was no time to ponder. As soon as Mike's feet touched the eroded soil of the islet, he unhooked the rope and ran up to the stranded hikers. "Ranger service," he shouted, blocking out the roar of the water. "One at a time, children first." The father, a haggard man in his early 40s, nodded gratefully. His sons, about the same age as Emma, were shivering with cold and fear. Mike helped the first teenager put on the safety harness, snapped the carabiners, and signaled to the pilot. The rope tightened, and the boy steamed into the air. Suddenly there was a cracking sound. The tree roots couldn't withstand the water pressure. The island began to crumble at the edges. "Hurry!" Mike hurriedly strapped the second teenager to the downed cable and waved his hand. When the helicopter returned a third time, only a small part of the islet remained. Mike strapped on the father of the family and was preparing to signal when the ground beneath his feet finally went into the water. At the last moment, he caught hold of a root sticking out of the water. The icy stream hit his chest, knocking the air out of his lungs. The rope with the hiker flew upwards, and Mike was left alone in the middle of the raging river. The current dragged him down the canyon, hurling rocks and fallen trees. A bitter thought flashed through his mind. Such a ridiculous end for someone who had survived in the most dangerous parts of the wilderness. But years on the edge of survival had taught Mike to never give up. Twisting in the water, he pulled an emergency knife from his pocket and, as the current nailed him to another broken trunk, he plunged the blade into the wet wood. The knife stuck, slowing his movement. With inhuman effort, Mike pulled himself up and planted his foot on the trunk. The water raged beneath him, but Crawford was above it now, sprawled on the log, and breathing heavily. He concentrated, assessing the situation. The shore was 30 meters away, the log slowly rotating. A few minutes more and he would be swept back into the stream. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement on the shore. It was the same figure, Dave. But he wasn't watching, he was acting. He was moving closer to the water, holding a rope. Their gazes met across the rushing stream. For a second, Mike hesitated. Was it a trap? But there was no choice. Dave swung round and threw the rope with a heavy object tied to the end. As if in slow motion, Mike saw it spin in the air and instinctively threw out his hand to catch the end. The rope tightened, and Mike began to move slowly towards the shore, overcoming the resistance of the stream. When he was a few meters from the ground, Dave reached out his hand to help him out. On the shore, they stood face to face, 2 former friends separated by 5 years of silence and 2 years of confrontation. "Why?" Mike asked, breathing heavily. Dave looked at him with a strange expression, a mixture of regret and determination. "It's not time to die, Pathfinder," he replied. "Not yet." Before Mike could say anything, Dave threw a soggy envelope at his feet and disappeared into the woods. The envelope contained an old photograph of them hunting together 10 years ago and a short note. "We need to talk. It's more important than you think." 2 days later, a search and rescue helicopter found Mike on a high canyon ledge. The official story was that the experienced ranger had made it out on his own using his survival skills. He told no one about his meeting with Dave, not even Carson, who met him at the site with a rare display of emotion for a stern boss, a firm handshake. "Your daughter called," he said while the medics examined Mike's bruises. "Was in a panic when she heard about the flood." Mike nodded. His relationship with Emma had started to improve over the past 2 years. She'd even come to the park twice. Awkward but important meetings. That evening, back at his cabin, Mike pulled out the photograph he'd found and took a long look at the faces, his and Dave's, young, smiling, with rifles on their shoulders. Between them lay the carcass of a cougar, their first hunt together. There was something about that photograph that kept him awake, something he hadn't noticed before. Looking closer, he saw a third man in the background, partially hidden by the trees, a man in a ranger's uniform. Mike turned the picture over. On the back in faded ink was written, "Ho, October 1992, Dave, Mike," and over the following months, Mike noticed signs of Dave's presence in the park several times. The distinctive tracks, the coded markings on the trees they used during their hunts together, but there was no more direct contact. In February 2008, Olympic Park was shaken by the news that poachers had committed a massacre deep in the forest, killing more than a dozen cougars in one night. The tracks led north to the Canadian border. Mike was sure it wasn't Dave. Too rude, too demonstrative. But then, who was it? And what did it have to do with what his former partner was clearly trying to tell him? In August 2009, on the pretext of a standard patrol, Mike returned to the Bailey Range Mountains, the site of their last meeting with Thompson 2 years earlier. In a small cave that only the two of them knew about, he found a cache, a sealed container with a map and a set of newspaper clippings. The articles all dealt with the same topic, the mysterious decline of predator populations in the western United States. Cougars, wolves, bears, they were all disappearing at an astonishing rate in certain regions, but not because of poaching, but for unspecified reasons. Dave left a note in the margin of one of the articles. "These are no ordinary hunters. The tracks lead up, high up." The map was littered with markings, locations, dates, strange symbols. One dot was circled in red, a section of the Olympic Park bordering the ocean. The date next to the mark, the 21st of October 2010. That same evening, Mike's satellite phone rang. Emma informed him that she had won a grant for field research in the Olympic Park and was planning to come exactly at the end of October. "Great," Mike replied, looking at the map with the date coinciding with his daughter's planned visit. "I'll be glad to see you." Mike didn't know what Dave's clues meant, but he could feel it. The time for the clue was approaching. He didn't realize that in a year's time, the person dearest to him would be drawn into this confrontation, and that the price of the truth would be higher than he was willing to pay. The radio came to life with a crackle, making Mike cringe. The incessant rain was causing interference, turning the dispatcher's words into hisses. "Say again, base. Didn't understand the message." "Crawford, guests, on base." Isolated words came through the noise. Emma. She had promised to arrive at the end of the month for her research project. Had she really arrived early? Mike headed towards the base, but his attention was caught by fresh footprints crossing the route. 3 men heavily laden were traveling west towards the coast, exactly where Dave's map had marked a mysterious point with the date the 21st of October, today's date. Changing direction, he followed the trail. Off the coast, Mike spotted 5 men unloading containers with biology lab logos from a boat. Among them were well-known genetic biologists. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to movement in the woods. Dave Thompson was sliding between the trees, taking pictures of the group and their equipment. A metallic click behind him made Mike stiffen. "Don't move, Crawford." Robert Carson's quiet voice sounded almost apologetic. "This isn't your war." "Bob, what's going on?" "Project Apex has been around for 15 years. researching the genetic material of higher predators, and it all requires samples. You're not killing animals for the skins, Mike realized. You're extracting biomaterial for experimentation. Out of the corner of his eye, Mike spotted a familiar rucksack in the bushes. Emma, his daughter, was here, watching everything that was going on. Taking advantage of Carson's momentary distraction, Mike knocked the rifle out of his superior's hands. Rushing to the bushes where he'd seen his daughter's backpack, he found only her research equipment and a working camera. Chilling with horror, Mike realized she had come down closer to the cove, attracted by the unusual equipment. Chaos reigned in the cove. Dave Thompson attacked openly, setting fire to the chemical containers and holding one of the scientists as a human shield. Mike spotted Emma in a bright yellow jacket by the water, filming what was happening on her phone. A guard with a gun was heading towards her. Without thinking, Mike lunged forward, knocking the guard to the ground moments before he fired. "Dad!" Her eyes widened with shock. "Questions later, let's run!" Grabbing his daughter's hand, he dragged her toward a narrow path on the cliffs. When sniper fire cut off their way up, Mike made a decision. They began to make their way along the dangerous ledge that circled the promontory, balancing over the sharp reefs below. Halfway up, Emma slipped. Mike grabbed her by the jacket, keeping her from falling with an incredible effort. Once they reached safety, they headed for the old logger's hut, a secret hideout known only to Mike and Dave. Waiting for them in the cabin was an injured Dave. "It all started 15 years ago," he explained. "A government project to study raptors. Then private investors, less control. I left when I found out about the next phase, non-consensual human testing." Dave held out a flash drive to Emma. "It's all here. Names, dates, evidence. Get this to Senator Harris. Only to him." As the stalker's lights flashed outside the windows, Mike turned to his daughter. "Em, listen. This is bigger than you and me. You have to deliver the proof." Emma hugged her father, determination in her eyes. "I'll come back for you, with reinforcements." Dave showed a secret exit leading to the mountainside. As the daughter disappeared down the tunnel, Mike turned to his old friend. "Just like old times?" Dave smiled weakly, checking the bolt. "Just like old times," Mike nodded. "Only now we're protecting instead of hunting." A week later, a helicopter circled over the ruins of the cabin. On the shore, federal agents were arresting high-ranking Park Service officials. Emma, wrapped in a thermal blanket, sat on a rock clutching Dave's compass. "With all due respect, Miss Crawford, the chances of finding your father are slim," the agent approached. "You don't know my father," she smiled. "If anyone could survive, it's Mike Crawford." The compass arrow pointed toward the untouched forest. "I'll find you, Dad," she whispered, "even if I have to become a tracker." Deep in the woods of Olympic Park, a lone figure advanced through the undergrowth. Exhausted but alive, Mike Crawford survived, jumping out of the burning cabin and hiding in the thicket until the helicopter arrived. His mission was accomplished. Emma was saved. The truth had come out. Decades of illegal experimentation were over. There was no point in going back right away. First, the noise had to die down. The system had to be cleansed of those involved in Project Apex. Mike knew Emma would understand, and someday she would find him. She had his blood in her, the blood of a tracker. In the meantime, he had all of Olympic National Park, the place he'd sworn to protect, and now it was protecting him. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howl sounded. Mike smiled and moved on, dissolving into the shadows of the ancient forest like a ghost, like a legend, like a true guardian of the Olympic forest. Do you think the heroes did the right thing? Or should they have sacrificed for the sake of science and progress? Perhaps the Apex project could have led to revolutionary discoveries in medicine and biotechnology. Write your opinion in the comments. It will be interesting to talk about this topic. Thanks for your attention, and see you in the next Wildlife Stories.